You're watching the Flourishing Introvert Show. If you're an introvert with more to offer and are looking for ways to play to your strengths authentically, you're in the right place. With up to 50% of any population identifying as an introvert, if you're not one, you'll know one, but you may not understand what makes them tick. Watching this show will help you to build that understanding and consequently build better business and personal relationships. Many people don't find out until their mid-years that what makes them different is their introversion. So this show is also for you if you're curious about becoming the best version of yourself. Let's get started. Hi and welcome. Welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Show. My name's Jo Rawbone and I want you to come in, pull up a chair and get comfy, because actually what we want to do over the next just about half an hour is really get you to settle down and enjoy some of what we're learning here. Now, does that surprise you, an introvert who's inviting somebody in? Well, one of the most commonly held myths is that introverts are antisocial. So it might surprise you, but actually that's not true. Introverts may be selectively social, but they're certainly not antisocial. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Too many introvert groups and communities actually perpetuate the myths and conflate different conditions with introversion. And that does us a huge disservice. And it's one of the reasons why I founded Flourishing Introverts, because actually so many times wherever I worked around the world, I noticed that the quiet ones were the ones who were overlooked and undervalued. So in my own quiet but persistent way, I'm busy busting myths. I am tackling the extroversion bias in business and in education, because it seems to be that the noisy, pushy ones, the ones who are really competitive, are the ones who seem to get on. And I don't think it should be that way. And I'm enabling introverts to flourish authentically too. So during this particular show, I'll be exploring and maybe even exploding some of the myths. Some of them you may be aware of, some may be new to you. And what we'll actually do whilst we're tackling some of those myths is actually get into the reality of what introversion is before we start dabbling in the magic pool of flourishing. And during that time, what that will enable you to do is to increase your awareness so that what you can actually do is understand yourselves better. And if you're working with and around introverts but aren't an introvert yourself, it'll help you to actually understand them better. How does that sound? So the title of this particular show is Myths, Misconceptions, and the Magic of Flourishing. As you can see, I won't be sharing many slides quite deliberately today. So you may want to take some notes or just really be present throughout this session, entirely up to you. And of course, you can always watch it on replay. So if you don't absorb everything straight away, that's absolutely fine. Let's start with these myths then, the myths that we know are unfortunately all too prevalent. And it might be things that have been leveled against you in the past. You may even have ended up believing them in the past. And if you're not an introvert, but work in and around or live with introverts, you may have even leveled these at other people over the years. Certainly they were leveled at me for quite a while, and I bought into them for quite a while. So let's start with the first thing then. Introvert is the same as being shy. No, it's not. We may speak less than other people, but that's not to do with shyness. We may engage less with other people, but that's not to do with shyness. In fact, it's about not wanting to be around people who suck our energy from us. So one of the reasons why we don't engage, one of the reasons why we don't party perhaps as much as other people, is because what we need to do is be around the right people. And as I imagine you might find out today, once I get going, is that get us on a subject that we know really well, and you can't stop us. You can't stop us talking. There is no shyness once we get talking about something that fascinates us. Another myth is that we're tongue-tied loners. Well, yeah, sure, I'm a bit nervous, but then who wouldn't be? That's absolutely natural. But tongue-tied loner? No, I don't think so. What it is down to is it's down to a different way we communicate as introverts. So introverts and extroverts have different communication styles, different communication approaches. Introverts tend to have this think, say, think communication process. And it's funny, isn't it? That process, that gesture always really helps me understand how it is that I do communicate. So when somebody asks me a question, I will give it some really good due consideration before I give my answer. And yet extroverts have a say, think, say communication process. You ask them a question and they'll answer it in a moment. It might not be what they really intended to say. It might not be something that they actually even wholeheartedly believe in. And as they're talking, they'll then start to think about it, and then they might come back and adjust. So our communication processes as introverts and extroverts are very different. And that's part of what has created this myth that we're tongue-tied loners who don't have anything to say for ourselves. Another myth is that we're arrogant. And that can come about because we don't join in with the banter. We don't join in with the small talk. We don't necessarily see it as something that's particularly enriching for us. But it doesn't mean we're arrogant. We may be a little distant from time to time, but we'll hear why that is later on. It's because we're trying to preserve the charge in our batteries. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's not about us being antisocial. We're selectively social. I love being around people that I have deep connection with, that I have meaningful conversations with. And I will avoid those who just, and this is my father's word, who just prattle on and say very little. So no, I'm not antisocial. I am very social with the right kind of people. The people who energize me, the people who actually help me take my thinking further, who challenge me, who take me to a different space, not those who keep me in some kind of groove that I'm already in. So I'm not interested in being in an echo chamber. The next one is that we're socially anxious. No. What's interesting, and we'll come on to talk about the difference between extroverts and introverts, is that extroverts can be socially anxious. Now, let's just think about that for a moment. Social anxiety is an overwhelming fear of social situations, of meeting and speaking to people. We don't have an overwhelming fear. We just don't really enjoy speaking with the people who don't give us back what we need. But imagine an extrovert who needs that social interaction to recharge their batteries. If they have social anxiety, frankly, it's crippling for them. But all too often, we see social anxiety and introversion conflated like it's the same thing. And it absolutely is not. Something else I see a lot in the introvert group is that introverts hate people. And the phrase for that is a misanthrope. We're not misanthropes. We don't hate people. Unfortunately, this is one of the things that's perpetuated in many of the introvert groups and communities that I'm part of. And you'll see people proudly talking about their new doormat that says, I've spoken to one person today, that's enough. Or on the doormat, you can off. And it's actually, that's not what introversion is about. That's something altogether different. But we need to understand what introversion is to understand why these myths perhaps exist and therefore how we can bust them, how we can shift some of them. There's also something that was leveled at me for a while, which is I was given feedback quite a lot of the time in my career, throughout my career, that I needed to be different. I needed fixing, that actually, you know, if I could just do this, I'd be okay. There was very little recognition that I was okay already with who I was as an introvert. And actually, yeah, we're not weird, we're wired differently. And the functional neuroimaging studies that have been done on the brains of introverts and extroverts, when stimulated in the same way, shows that our brains light up differently, proving that we are wired differently. We're not weird. There is nothing to fix. There is no mental health problem associated with being an introvert, other than having to live in a society and a world that's biased towards extroversion, I guess. One of my most favorite quotes around this area comes from Alexander Den Heyer. And what he says is, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And we would do really well to take that on board, to pay attention to that when thinking about the introverts that we socialize with, that are in our families, that we work with. Introverts don't need fixing, but perhaps we do need to fix the environment in which we're all expected to flourish. Another myth is that introverts are sad and depressed because we spend time on our own, so we must be really sad. But actually, the only time I get sad is when I'm in an environment where I can't be myself, when I'm in an overwhelmingly busy, loud, noisy environment. That's when I feel sad. And when I can't get out into nature, that's when I feel sad. I feel sad during the winter when the sun doesn't recharge me. That's when I feel sad. But it's not to do with my introversion. I feel sad when I can feel more sad perhaps when I'm with people who don't get me, who perhaps try to dominate me. But there is something about if we are in that environment where we feel overwhelmed for too long, that takes us on the slippery slope from overwhelm through to introvert hangover and down into introvert burnout. Now that is a place where I've been and have been depressed. And we'll talk about that on a future show. Because if we can stop ourselves as introverts going there, or if you can help other introverts not go there, then it will be a beautiful thing. Another myth is that we're too quiet. Well, I haven't stopped talking yet, have I? So maybe not. Because get us talking about subjects we love and we can talk forever. Get us involved in those generative conversations where we are stimulated by actually being challenged by the thoughtful conversations, and we won't stop talking. Susan Cain was probably the person who brought the subject of introversion to the fore in the first place. And her book is called Quiet: The Power of Introversion in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And there's never a truer word. There's another one here that is that introverts are timid. You know, we're very sheepish. We don't speak up for ourselves. Well, there's potentially some truth in that. But I tell you why, because we can't get a word in edgeways quite often. So that's why we may come across as timid to other people, because we're forever trying to get something to say and nobody will notice that actually we're wanting to say something. So many introverts would just go, if nobody's paying any attention, I'll give up. So people may think that's timidity, but of course it's not really, because once we find our purpose and our passion, once we can pursue that, courage comes to the fore. There is no timidity. We just need to do a bit of work to find out what that purpose is. Some people say that introverts lack confidence. I say, don't confuse noise with confidence. Noisy people are not necessarily more confident. In fact, quite often the noise is a bit of a front to mask some insecurity behind it. And there are plenty of really confident introverts out there that we see in day-to-day life. Actors, politicians, creatives, leaders, all sorts of people. And whilst we're talking about leaders, there's also this myth that introverts don't make great leaders. Well, maybe we should ask Barack Obama, Richard Branson, Simon Sinek, the Queen, reportedly, Bill Gates, Martha Minow, who's Dean of Harvard, Marissa Mayer, Yahoo President and CEO. There are plenty of very powerful introverted leaders, and the way they go about leading is quite different. They often lead from within as opposed to charging out front. And quite often they take people with them for that reason. And what goes along with that, of course, is that introverts are no good at public speaking. Well, I've emceed events of over 1,000 people, delivered a TEDx talk back in 2019, delivered courses face-to-face and more recently, of course, virtually for over 30 years. So I don't think public speaking is an issue. But I do need to make sure that I'm in the right state energetically to be able to do that public speaking. See, many of these myths have kind of been written into folklore now. And some of it, because if you do an internet search on introvert or introversion, some of the words that come up really don't do us any favors. Some of those myths that I've mentioned are some of the words that will come to the fore. Whereas if you search on extrovert, it's lively, sociable, outgoing, the things that sound more appealing. Funnily enough, I was reminded of this just this week and the importance of the clarification about what introversion really is and what it isn't. I joined a couple of show hosts in this win-win women community. And I was chatting with them. They were asking me what I do. I was chatting with them. And one of them immediately said, oh yeah, I'm an introvert. And somebody who was on the sideline said, whatever makes you think you're an introvert? So she said, oh, absolutely. And she went on to tell this fabulous story about how they were out at a big conference and 4 of them were sat at a table that had more seats than 4. And she said, I'm just going to go to the bathroom, but whilst I'm away, please do not invite anyone else to join us because I need this downtime to recharge. When she came back from the bathroom, the more extroverted had gathered a cluster of people and they'd pulled chairs up to join them. And the one who'd done the inviting, who was also part of this conversation, said, I looked across at her and she rolled her eyes. And I knew exactly what was going on. You see, you can't actually tell an introvert by their behavior because we can behave in any way we choose, provided we have sufficient charge in our mental and emotional batteries. So the difference simply between introversion and extroversion, between introverts and extroverts, is as Jung defined, it's where we get our mental energy from and what drains those mental batteries. So I have this image always of extroverts because they get their mental energy from social interaction, from active experiences, from change, from being in conversation with people. And I have to say, any conversation, not necessarily a particularly stimulating one. They're almost like they've got a solar panel, and all the while they're in that stimulating, noisy, loud, chatty environment, they are drawing in the resources they need to create energy. That's very different from an introvert. An introvert who I imagine as being someone who checks the battery and sees how far it's drained, takes themselves off quietly to plug into the wall, a bit like we do with our mobile phones, and leave them there for 30 minutes or more to fully recharge. So what makes us different is where we get our energy from and what drains our batteries. But provided we've got sufficient charge, we can behave in any way we choose. So you can't tell an introvert by our behavior. What you can tell an introvert by is when all of a sudden they check out, when the lights, when the lights go out, when actually they withdraw either physically or you can see them withdraw mentally. So that's what makes the difference. But even that isn't enough in a way, because there are 6 different types of introverts, which I'll talk about on another show. So we're not even all the same as introverts. So it's probably time to start thinking about how we might dabble our toes into flourishing, because obviously my business is called Flourishing Introverts. What is it that prompted me to come up with that phrase? Well, I'd been searching for what to call a group of introverts who are feisty, who kind of get on with things, who are ambitious and want to kind of make something of themselves. And I woke up one morning with this word flourishing running through my mind. So I went away and did a bit of research. And boy, was it exactly the right word. Because positive psychologist Dr. Lynn Suits describes flourishing as this: it's the product of the pursuit and engagement of an authentic life. And I'm going to deconstruct this a bit as we go. So the pursuit and engagement of an authentic life, there's no faking it that will satisfy an introvert, because it needs to be authentic. And through that, what we do, and her quote goes on, that brings inner joy and happiness. See, introverts aren't sad, lonely, and depressed. We're joyful when what we're doing is pursuing and engaged in that authentic life. And through meeting goals and being connected with life's passions, that purpose and passion that I talked about, and relishing in accomplishments through the peaks and valleys of life. So we know life is going to be a bit of a roller coaster. No one promised it was going to be a smooth ride. But we flourish actually when what we do is we connect with those passions and enjoy the journey of the ups and downs. That's what flourishing is about. And that's exactly what I'm helping introverts to both realize and manifest. So it goes on to say that flourishing is not a kind of a trait or a characteristic. It's not a destination. It's a journey. It's an active process. So we choose when to flourish. I choose day by day to flourish. It's a choice I make day by day, moment by moment, because I know that's where I'm going to get the most out of myself and out of other people too. So there are some potential things we can do to enhance our chance of flourishing. We could make sure that we've got the right support system in place. And it doesn't have to be a social chit-chat network, but what it does have to be is it has to be solid relationships with people who really support you, who really get you, whether that be in business or personal life. It's also about committing to experiencing the good in life. So even though we're on that those ups and downs, it's about deliberately looking to experience the good. It's why one of the things I do is have a gratitude practice, so that I remind myself of the good things, even in, frankly, what is a pretty dire world right now. There are still great things going on. So I know that I can achieve and reach goals and milestones that I'm looking to achieve. We can also flourish more by choosing to have fun. Now, fun is very subjective. My version of fun may not be your version of fun. Certainly, I don't subscribe to a lot of my extroverted friends' version of fun. From time to time and in small doses I can. But actually fun for me is often getting my hands in the dirt out in my garden. It's being out in nature. My lilac tree is just coming into full bloom. It's being out there and smelling the lilac. It's things like that that I find fun. It's also dancing and kicking the surf at the edge of the waves. But it's not necessarily doing things with 100 other people that I find fun. And then finally, it's about really enhancing that sense of purpose and meaning in life. Find what it is that lights you up, that really does deliver you that authentic need to contribute, to grow, to serve. So the more we do to enhance that meaning in life, actually the better. So in this show, we've busted some of those myths, some of the myths that are often bandied around and all too frequent. We've explored the true nature of introversion and extroversion, and it just being where we get our energy from and what drains our mental and emotional batteries. It's not behavior, it's that basic need that defines whether or not we're introvert or extrovert. And we started dipping our toes in the waters of flourishing. We started to understand a little about that. My question to you then is, what is it you're going to do as a result of this reminder, as a result of the clarity that you may have gained from the nudge that I might have given you, that is all about enabling introverts to be who they really are? And if you want to find out more, of course, you can visit my website at flourishingIntroverts.com. And there you'll find my introvert questionnaire that will help you understand which one of those 6 types of introvert you are. You'll also find links to my podcast, weekly podcast, also out on a Thursday. Thursdays are going to be busy days from now on. And my blog, and soon to be courses, not there quite yet. And my website is just about to be updated, so it may look a little bald for a while as well. But I really want you to think about, what are you going to do with this clarity, this information? Because there is so much work to do shifting the bias that exists in society, in business, in education, in families. It's everywhere around us. Somebody asked me when the extroversion bias came into being. And I've got a working hypothesis on this, which I'll share with you and we might expand on in a future show. And my working hypothesis is that the extroversion bias came into being in the 80s, accompanied by huge shoulder pads and obscene salaries for bankers. Because I was in the workplace before that, and it was quite a quiet, respectful place. It wasn't noisy. It wasn't all kind of high-fiving and hoorahing. So my personal belief is that the extroversion bias is a relatively new phenomena. It needs busting, but I'm going to do more work about that. So thank you for joining me on this launch episode of the Flourishing Introvert Show. And just to finish us off, let's just do this.